The phone rang during a council vote, and by the time I hung up, my hands didn't belong to me anymore. Mrs. Cuthbert, your mother's boat capsized on the Wilmington. We've got search teams out now. That was all the deputy said. No name for what was happening to my chest. No name for the sound that came out of me. Right there in chambers, in front of people who'd voted for me twice. My name is Ronia Cuthbert. I sit on the Savannah City Council, and until that Saturday afternoon, I believed my life was orderly. A husband, a title, a mother who still went fishing alone every weekend because nobody could talk her out of it. I left the meeting without excusing myself properly. I don't remember the drive. I remember gripping the wheel like it was the only solid thing left in the world. And I remember calling Marrow 3 times before he picked up. I'm at the course, he said. What's wrong? Golf. Every Saturday for over a year now, rain or shine, he'd leave before sunrise and not roll back in until well past dark, smelling like sun and grass, talking about nothing in particular. A long day for a round of golf, but I never thought to question a man who needed something that was his. It's Mama, I said. Just come. By the time I reached the river landing, there were already 4 patrol cars and a crowd of strangers standing too close to the water, the way people do when something terrible is happening to someone else. I pushed through them. A deputy caught my arm before I could get to the edge. Ma'am, we need you to stay back. That's my mother out there. He didn't argue with me after that. He just held on, gently, like he'd done this before with other daughters. They told me what they knew, which wasn't much. Ottilie Cuthbert had gone out that morning the way she always did, alone. Same stretch of river, same little aluminum boat she'd had since before my father passed. A man fishing further down had seen it capsized around noon, empty, drifting. No sign of her. He'd called it in within minutes, and still, hours later, nothing. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're watching from. I want to know who's sitting with me through this. The sun started going down orange over the water, and I stood there in my council blazer, still creased from the morning's meeting, watching boats with searchlights crawl up and down the river like they were looking for something that didn't want to be found. Marrow finally arrived, breathless, smelling like grass and sweat, and put his hand on my back. I didn't lean into it the way I might have a year ago. A woman from the Department of Natural Resources came to find me near sunset. I could tell by her face before she opened her mouth. We're going to have to suspend the search until morning, she said. The current's strong tonight. It isn't safe to keep divers in the water. And my mother? She didn't answer that. She didn't have to. I stood at the edge of that river long after everyone else had gone home, staring at black water that had taken my mother and given nothing back. Not a body, not an answer, not even the decency of a goodbye. By the 4th day, they stopped sending divers. Detective Roy Pruitt told me this himself, standing on my porch with his hat in his hands like a man delivering worse news than he was. We've covered the stretch twice over, he said. Current's strong this time of year. Sometimes the river just doesn't give a body back for weeks. Weeks. I stood there holding that word like it might break in my hands. What he didn't tell me, what I only learned later, was the conversation he had with his partner in the parking lot that same afternoon. The boat's bothering me, he said quietly. His partner looked over. How? Pruitt glanced back toward the river. The fisherman who called it in said the fuel tank still had plenty left in it. Life jacket still on board too. Most accidental capsizes I work. People either grab the jacket or somebody finds it floating loose nearby. Doesn't mean anything by itself. Just means I'm not comfortable making assumptions yet. His partner shrugged. You thinking foul play? No, Pruitt said. I'm thinking I don't know enough to stop asking questions. That was all. Not a theory. Not a prediction. Just enough uncertainty to keep him from filing the case away in his head. I had a council session that Monday I couldn't postpone, a vote on the Riverfront Housing Initiative of all things. My mother's river on the agenda while she was still somewhere in it. I sat through it numb, nodding at the right moments, thanking colleagues for their condolences in the hallway like I was running for office on my own grief. It was Verly who held the rest of it together. My sister had been managing Mama's money since Daddy died 20 years ago. Bills, the house, the small trust Daddy left behind. Mama trusted her with all of it long before I had a council seat or a husband, long before either of us imagined we'd be planning a funeral for a woman the river hadn't returned yet. I already called the funeral home, Verly told me, sitting across my kitchen table with a legal pad full of her neat handwriting. I know it feels wrong without her here. But Ronia, people need somewhere to put their grief. We give them a service. We let them say goodbye, even without a casket they can see into. And if she's found after, then we have a second service, Verly said gently. I've seen this happen before with the Aldridge family. Sometimes you have to let people grieve on a schedule, even when the river won't cooperate with yours. I didn't have the strength to argue with 20 years of her steadiness. She'd never once given me a reason to. Marrow stayed quiet through most of it, which I told myself was respect. Saturday came again, his usual day, and he left before sunrise like always, golf bag in the trunk, kissed my forehead on his way out. I didn't think anything of it. That week, grief had taken up every inch of room I had for noticing anything else. By Thursday, Verly had a date set, a small chapel near Mama's church, flowers ordered, a program drafted with a photograph of Mama from before any of this. Smiling, sun hat on, holding up a fish she'd caught on a Saturday, just like the one that took her. We'll bury an empty box, I said, staring at the program. I don't know how to feel about that. You don't have to feel one way, Verly said. You just have to get through it. I nodded, because what else was there to do? I had a council seat to hold, a husband I still trusted without question, and a sister who'd carried our family's burdens longer than I'd carried anything at all. It wasn't suspicion I felt that week. It was something quieter, an unease I couldn't yet name, sitting low in my stomach as I watched my sister plan a funeral for a woman whose body still hadn't come home. 3 Saturdays since Mama went into that river, and Marrow hadn't missed a single one of his. I noticed it the way you notice a clock ticking too loud in a quiet house. Not all at once, but suddenly impossible to ignore. He left before sunrise, same as always, golf bag over his shoulder, same easy kiss on my forehead. No mention of postponing, no mention of staying home with me while I sat in that chapel 2 weeks ago, looking at flowers arranged around a photograph instead of a body. A wife doesn't expect her husband's grief to match her own exactly. I told myself that more than once. Men carry things differently. But there's a difference between carrying something differently and not carrying it at all. Calvert had been driving me for almost 6 years, to council sessions, to events, to the hospital the night Daddy passed before I'd even married Marrow. He knew the rhythm of my life better than most people in it. That Saturday morning, he pulled the car around as Marrow's truck disappeared down the street, golf bag visible through the back window, same as every week. You ever notice he don't come back smelling like he played golf? Calvert asked, not looking at me, both hands steady on the wheel. I didn't answer right away. I'd noticed. I just hadn't let myself sit with it. No grass on his shoes, Calvert continued. No sunburn, even in summer. A man plays 18 holes in this Georgia heat, Mrs. Cuthbert. He comes back looking like he's been outside. Mr. Devereaux comes back looking like he's been sitting in an air-conditioned room all day. Calvert? I'm not telling you what to think, he said, gently, the way a man speaks when he's chosen his words for a long time before saying them. I'm just telling you what I see. Over a year now, I've been picking you up after he leaves on Saturdays. Same bag, same time. Never once seen a club come out of it. The silence in that car stretched long enough that I could hear my own pulse in my ears. "You're the only one who said anything," I told him. "Because everybody else is busy being kind to you," he said. "Sometimes kindness looks like silence. I figured you needed somebody to not be kind for a minute." I sat with that the rest of the ride, turning it over like a stone in my pocket. My mother gone 3 weeks with no body to bury properly. My sister managing every detail of a grief I hadn't asked her to manage. And now, my husband, golf bag over his shoulder every Saturday, coming home without a single sign he'd touched a golf course in his life. Calvert pulled up to my house and put the car in park, but he didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. "Next Saturday," I said, mostly to myself. "I want you to follow him. Not me driving, you. I'll sit in the back, and we'll see where that golf bag actually goes." Calvert met my eyes in the rearview mirror for just a second, and nodded once, like a man agreeing to something he'd been waiting weeks for me to ask. Calvert booked the flight under his own card, the way he'd done everything else that week, quietly, without asking why twice. Marrow left the house before sunrise, his usual time, golf bag over his shoulder, and drove straight past the course without slowing down. Calvert and I stayed 3 cars back the whole way to the airport. Inside the terminal, we kept our distance and watched him check a single bag at the counter. Calvert waited until Marrow disappeared toward security before stepping up to an agent of his own. 10 minutes later, he came back holding 2 boarding passes. "Same flight," he said simply. I nodded. I didn't trust myself to say anything else. I didn't speak the entire flight. Calvert sat beside me, and somewhere over the gulf, he finally said, "Whatever's on the other side of this, Mrs. Cuthbert, you don't have to face it alone." I didn't answer him either. I didn't have words left to spend. Houston's heat hit different than Savannah's, drier, harder, the kind that presses down instead of wrapping around you. We stayed inside the terminal long enough to avoid being obvious. From a distance, I watched Marrow collect his bag and head outside toward the taxi stand. Only after his cab pulled away did Calvert collect the rental car he'd reserved ahead of time. We kept a careful distance behind the taxi, weaving through streets that got smaller and quieter the further we went, until we were somewhere on the outskirts of the city, past the highways, past anything that looked like where a councilman's husband should be spending a Saturday. The cab finally stopped in front of a low brick apartment building, the kind with one shared parking lot, and curtains instead of blinds in most windows. I watched Marrow pay the driver and climb out. The golf bag never came with him. It stayed in the trunk until the taxi pulled away, leaving him standing there with nothing in his hands except the lie he'd been carrying for over a year. He walked up to a ground floor door like his feet already knew the way. "Stay back," Calvert said quietly, parking just far enough away that the building's shadow covered most of the car. Marrow knocked twice. Waited. I leaned forward in my seat, my whole body gone still in a way I didn't recognize. The door opened. I knew the shape of her before I let myself believe it. The way she stood with one hand on her hip. The way her head tilted slightly when she smiled. The same tilt I'd watched my whole life across a dinner table, a hospital waiting room, my own wedding. Verley. My sister opened that door, wearing a robe like she lived there, like this was nothing, like this was ordinary, and reached up to touch my husband's face the way you touch someone you've touched 100 times before. I didn't move. I didn't breathe right. Whatever sound wanted to come out of me, I swallowed it whole, because some part of me, some old, frightened, surviving part, understood that the moment I made a sound, this would become real in a way I couldn't take back. Marrow stepped inside. The door closed. Calvert didn't ask if I'd seen what he'd seen. He didn't need to. He just waited, hands on the wheel, eyes forward, giving me whatever silence I needed. I don't know how long we sat there. Long enough for the heat outside to shimmer off the pavement. Long enough for my hands to stop trembling and go cold instead, still and steady in a way that scared me more than the shaking had. Take me to the airport, I finally said. Calvert pulled away from the curb slowly, like he didn't want to disturb whatever had just settled inside me. I watched that brick building shrink in the side mirror until it disappeared behind another row of houses, and I said nothing the entire ride back, not one word, not even to myself. Marrow came home Sunday evening smelling like airport, not grass, and I kissed him on the cheek like nothing in the world had shifted underneath me. Good round? I asked. Same as always, he said, setting his bag down by the door. The same bag, untouched. Clubs still wrapped in plastic from the last time he'd actually played, months ago, before any of this started. I'd never noticed that detail until I was looking for it. I didn't ask him where he'd really been. I didn't ask about the robe, or the way Verley's hand had touched his face, or why my own sister's mouth had curved into a smile I'd only ever seen her give our mother. Every question lined up behind my teeth, and I swallowed every one of them whole. That night, lying beside him in the dark, I made myself breathe slow and even, the way I'd learned to do in council chambers when a vote didn't go my way and the cameras were still rolling. Calm reads as composed. Composed reads as in control. I needed, more than anything, to feel like I had something left to control. I thought about calling Verley. I got as far as opening my phone, her name sitting there in my contacts the way it had for 30-some years. My sister, my mother's right hand, the woman who'd sat beside me at every funeral our family had ever held. I stared at her name until the screen dimmed on its own. If I confronted her now, she'd have an explanation ready before I finished my sentence. She always did. 20 years of managing Mama's money, 20 years of being the steady one, the reasonable one. She'd talk circles around whatever I said until I doubted my own eyes. I knew her that well. I'd watched her smooth over harder things than this. So I closed the phone instead. I lay there turning over a decision I didn't fully understand yet, except that some old, quiet part of me, the part that had survived 2 decades of council politics, backroom votes, men who underestimated me in meetings, knew exactly what to do with information nobody else knew I had. Watch. Say nothing. Let them believe I was still the grieving daughter, the trusting wife, the woman too broken to notice anything beyond her own sorrow. I didn't sleep much that night. Around 4 a.m, I got up, made coffee I didn't drink, and sat at the kitchen table where Verley had spread her legal pad 2 weeks earlier, planning a funeral for a woman whose body still hadn't surfaced. I thought about Mama then, really thought about her, past the grief, into the specifics. The trust Daddy left, the house, the accounts Verley had managed alone since before I'd ever had a reason to ask questions. By sunrise, I'd pulled out the small file box Mama kept in the hall closet, bank statements, deed copies, the trust paperwork she'd never let anyone touch but Verley and, apparently, no one else. I told myself I was doing it to keep busy, to give my hands something honest to hold, while my mind sat somewhere darker. That wasn't the truth, and some part of me already knew it. I wasn't looking for distraction. I was looking for a reason to stop trusting my sister with anything ever again. And some instinct older than grief told me I wouldn't have to look very long to find one. The bank statements didn't make sense the first time I read them, and they made even less sense the second. A transfer, 3 weeks before Mama's boat capsized, $18,000, moved out of her personal account into something labeled only with a string of numbers I didn't recognize. No memo, no explanation. I sat at that kitchen table with my coffee gone cold beside me, reading the same line over and over like it might rearrange itself into something I could understand. I called the bank Monday morning, still in my robe, council session be damned for once. I need help understanding a transfer connected to my mother's account, I told the woman on the phone. My mother is currently listed as missing, and I'm trying to make sense of some paperwork. She verified my identity, asked a few questions, then paused. I'm sorry, Mrs. Cuthbert, she said. Without legal authority on the account, I can't. discuss specific transactions or account activity. What I can tell you is that any existing account permissions remain unchanged unless they're revoked through the proper legal process. I thanked her and hung up. The call lasted less than 10 minutes and told me almost nothing. Or at least, that was what I thought. I sat there staring at the phone, replaying her words. Existing account permissions remain unchanged. I'd assumed, without ever questioning it, that grief and paperwork moved together, that someone, somewhere, would have frozen everything the moment Mama disappeared. Nobody had. Whatever authority existed before that boat capsized still existed now. I went back to the file box. For the first time, I stopped looking at it like a daughter and started looking at it like a councilwoman reviewing documents before a vote. Near the bottom, tucked between insurance papers and old tax records, I found a copy of Mama's power of attorney paperwork. Verley's name sat there in black ink. Full financial authority. The document was years old. I'd probably seen it before and forgotten it. Now I read every line. Then I kept digging. A few folders later, I found something else. A trust review notice. The paperwork wasn't recent enough to explain the transfer, but it mentioned the Calhoun Street house and listed Verley as the acting contact for trust matters. Attached behind it was a more recent letter addressed directly to Verley regarding an ongoing property review. I read it twice, then a third time. Mama's house. The house Daddy had paid off before he died. The one Mama swore she'd be buried from. Not memorialized at some chapel with an empty box where her body should have been. I sat back in my chair. 20 years, I kept thinking. 20 years of believing my sister had simply been doing what needed doing. Paying bills, keeping the lights on, managing what none of us wanted to manage ourselves. I'd never once asked to see a statement. I'd never once wondered what unchecked access for 2 decades might look like, dressed up as devotion. The transfer sat there on one page. The power of attorney paperwork sat on another. The trust documents sat beside both. Individually, none of it proved anything. Together, it made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't explain. I sat with that file box open in front of me, statements spread out like evidence I didn't yet know how to read, and understood, finally, that my sister hadn't just been carrying responsibilities all these years. She'd had every door in this family standing wide open for decades, and nobody had ever once asked her to close one. I didn't call her. I didn't confront her. I closed the file box instead, slow and quiet, and decided I needed to see far more before I let her know I'd seen anything at all. Verley showed up Wednesday morning with a casserole dish and that same legal pad, like she'd never left. "You look tired," she said, setting the dish down on my counter without asking. "I know you've been buried in Mama's files. Let me take some of that off your plate." I let her see exactly what I wanted her to see. A tired sister, hollowed out by grief, grateful for help she hadn't asked for. It cost me something to play that part. I was getting better at it than I wanted to admit. "There's just so much," I said, gesturing toward the file box still sitting on my table. "I don't even know where to start." "That's what I'm here for." She pulled a chair close and started sorting, quick and practiced, the way she'd sorted Mama's paperwork for 20 years without anyone looking over her shoulder. Bank statements, the house deed, the trust documents. I can organize all this so it makes sense to you. I watched her hands move across the table. When she reached the statement with the $18,000 transfer, the one I'd already memorized, the one the bank clerk had explained to me 4 days ago, her fingers didn't pause. She simply slid it beneath 2 other papers, smooth as breathing, and kept talking. "The house deed's the important one right now," she said. "We want to make sure nothing happens to that while things are unsettled." "What do you mean, unsettled?" "Probate, the missing death certificate, all of it. Until that's resolved, the house is vulnerable. I'd hate for something to slip through the cracks while you're grieving." She said it so gently, so reasonably. that for half a second, I almost thanked her for thinking of it. Almost. I noticed, the way I was learning to notice things now, that she'd folded the transfer statement clean out of sight without me asking her to, and that she'd done it without breaking the rhythm of her own sentence. A woman doesn't move that smoothly unless she's done it 100 times before. What Verley didn't know was that 2 nights earlier, I'd sat at this same table long after midnight, photographing every statement, every deed, every trust document in the box. My phone held copies of everything now, backed up twice before I ever let her through the front door. "You don't have to worry about any of this," Verley continued, stacking files into a neat pile, squaring the edges like she was closing a deal instead of grieving our mother. "Let me hold on to these for now. I'll bring everything back once it's organized properly." There it was. The ask, wrapped in kindness, dressed up as relief. A year ago, I would have handed her that box without a second thought, grateful someone else wanted to carry what I couldn't. That version of me still existed somewhere, tired enough, broken enough, to want exactly that kind of rescue. But I'd already seen the apartment in Houston. I'd already heard the bank clerk explain how much access my sister had, and for how long, without a single person checking behind her. I looked at her, steady, composed, 20 years of practiced trustworthiness sitting across my kitchen table. And I made a choice I understood perfectly. "Take it," I said, sliding the file box toward her. "I trust you with it." Verley smiled, gathered the box into her arms like it weighed nothing at all. And I watched her walk out my front door, carrying what she thought was every piece of evidence I'd need to prove what she'd done. What she didn't know was that the real evidence had already left the box days ago. It was sitting safely in my pocket, waiting for the moment I'd finally need it. A week after Verley walked out of my house carrying Mama's file box, I sat at my kitchen table going through the photographs I'd taken before she left. Hundreds of them. Bank statements, trust notices, insurance paperwork, documents I'd copied almost on instinct, not fully understanding why at the time. Now I understood. I checked them most nights after Marrow had gone to sleep, the blue light from my phone the only thing awake in the house besides me. It was a Tuesday when I found it. Not a bank transfer this time. A credit card statement. Mama's card. I almost missed it. A hotel charge, dated 4 days after Mama's boat went under. Location: Houston, Texas. I sat up straighter. Verley had told everyone she was in Dubai that week. She'd told me herself, over the phone, voice thick with practiced grief, explaining she couldn't fly home in time for the search because of some business deal she couldn't walk away from. I remembered believing her without a flicker of doubt. Why would I doubt a sister who'd never given me reason to? I zoomed in on the statement and kept reading. The hotel wasn't the only charge. There was a rental car company, a restaurant, several transactions clustered into the same stretch of days. Houston, every one of them. I stared at the dates. Then I stared at them again. Flight records weren't something I had access to directly, and I wasn't pretending otherwise. But financial records told their own story if you looked at them long enough. What I saw wasn't proof. Not yet. But it was enough to make the Dubai story feel very small and very fragile. No overseas hotel charges, no foreign transaction fees, nothing that suggested international travel at all. Just Houston. The same city where I'd watched my husband disappear into a brick apartment building. The same city where Verley had supposedly never been. The same city appearing over and over again on charges tied to my mother's accounts. The same week. The same city. The same Saturday. I sat there in the dark with my phone glowing in my hands, feeling something shift loose inside my chest. Not shock anymore, not exactly. Something colder. More exact. 2 pieces of a puzzle I'd been holding separately finally sliding together into a single ugly shape. I'd spent weeks treating the affair and the missing money like 2 different betrayals happening to collide. My husband's weakness in one hand, my sister's long-managed carelessness in the other. I'd let myself believe Verley was simply a woman who'd crossed a line with my husband, the way people sometimes do, the way grief sometimes pushes people toward the wrong comfort. But the more I stared at those dates, the harder it became to believe any of this was accidental. There was no Dubai. There never had been. There was only Houston. The apartment, the hotel, the rental car, the lie about a business trip dressed up just enough to survive a phone call from a grieving sister, too broken to ask the right questions. I thought about the $18,000 moved out of Mama's account 3 weeks before the boat capsized. I thought about the trust paperwork tied to the Calhoun Street house. I thought about how easily Verley had hidden that transfer statement at my kitchen table, smooth as something she'd practiced. None of it had ever been separate. Whatever my sister and my husband were doing in Houston, it wasn't just an affair carried out in secret, convenient and shameful and small. It was funded. It was protected. And for the first time, I found myself wondering whether the money was only the beginning of what they were hiding. I bought a notebook the next morning. Plain, spiral-bound. The kind you'd use for a grocery list, not a betrayal. I started with dates. The $18,000 transfer, 3 weeks before Mama disappeared. The Houston hotel charge, 4 days after. The trust release Verley had filed while I was still too numb to read my own mother's bank statements. I wrote them down in order, side by side, and watched a pattern take shape that no longer looked like coincidence. I photographed everything I could reach. Screenshots of the online banking portal, saved before Verley or anyone else could think to lock me out of it. I took pictures of the bank clerk's name and the date she'd told me about the power of attorney, just in case I ever needed to prove I'd asked the question honestly, before I knew where the answer would lead. My hands didn't shake doing this. That surprised me more than anything else that week. Marrow came home Thursday, smelling like nothing in particular, kissed my cheek, asked what was for dinner. I made him a plate and sat across from him and asked about his week like a wife who hadn't watched him disappear into a brick apartment building 3 weeks earlier. He never noticed the difference. I'd gotten that good, that fast, at becoming someone he no longer knew he was looking at. I thought about confronting Verley outright, showing up at her door the way she'd shown up at mine, laying the statements on her table the way she'd laid out that legal pad, demanding she explain herself. I let myself imagine it for almost a full minute before I talked myself out of it. She'd have an answer ready. She always did. 20 years of practiced composure doesn't crack just because her sister finally asks a hard question. She'd smooth it over, buy herself time, maybe even move whatever was left to move before I could stop her. And Marrow, confronting him meant tipping my hand to the one person most likely to run straight to Verley the moment he felt cornered. I needed him comfortable. I needed him to keep believing I hadn't seen anything at all. There was only one person who already had a reason to keep looking, who'd never stopped looking, even after everyone else had quietly closed the book on my mother's disappearance. I thought about Detective Pruitt standing on my porch weeks ago, hat in his hands, telling me the river sometimes didn't give a body back for weeks. I thought about the conversation I hadn't been there to hear, the one I'd later learn about, where he told his partner something about this case was sitting wrong with him, that he wasn't closing the file. Not yet. He'd already felt it. Whatever instinct had kept that file open on his desk instead of in some drawer marked closed, it was the same instinct sitting low in my own stomach now, except I had something he didn't. I had dates. I had screenshots. I had a notebook full of a story that made sense only once you stopped believing in coincidence. I closed the notebook, set it inside my purse where I could reach it without anyone noticing, and decided, finally, exactly who I needed to call first. Not Marrow, not Verley. Detective Roy Pruitt was the only person in this whole unraveling story who'd never once stopped looking for the truth. And I intended to hand him a reason to look, harder than he ever had. I waited until Sunday night, after dinner, after the dishes were done and the house had gone quiet, in the way I'd learned to use against people. "I know about Verley," I said. I watched something collapse behind his eyes, fast, like a building giving way one floor at a time. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't try to deny it. 20 seconds of silence told me everything his mouth hadn't gotten to yet. "Rowania." "How long?" 8 months. His voice came out smaller than I'd ever heard it. It wasn't supposed to. I didn't plan for it to keep going this long. I kept my face still, the way I'd practiced for council votes that didn't go my way, and let him keep talking. People confess more when you don't interrupt them. Silence pulls things out of a guilty man faster than any question can. "It just happened," he said, and then it didn't stop happening. "Does she love you?" "I don't know what she feels," he said, and something in the way he said it, careful, almost protective, told me he knew exactly what she felt, and didn't want to say it out loud. I let the quiet stretch again. He filled it, like I knew he would. "She's not in a good place right now," he said. "All of this with your mama, managing everything alone. It's worn her down more than you know." "More than me?" I kept my voice even. "I lost my mother, Marrow." "I know. I just mean, Verley's been under a different kind of pressure, keeping everyone calm, trying to make sure your mama was comfortable through all of this." The words landed between us. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I watched realization hit him. His eyes flickered, just for a second, but I saw it. "Was comfortable," he said quickly. "That's what I meant." I tilted my head. "Was?" "The last few months before—" He stopped, started again. "Before everything happened." I didn't say anything. The silence seemed to make him nervous. "I just meant she worried about your mother a lot," he said. "Everybody did." "Comfortable," I repeated quietly. It was a poor choice of words. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. The practiced calm I'd watched him wear all evening had started to slip, and once I noticed that, I couldn't stop noticing it. I let him believe I'd accepted the explanation. I nodded, looked away, let my face soften into something that resembled forgiveness I didn't feel. He relaxed slightly, the way people do when they think they've talked their way back onto solid ground. But I sat there long after he'd gone quiet, turning that moment over and over in my mind. Not the word itself, the correction, the speed of it, the look on his face when he realized he'd said it. Most people talk about the missing carefully. They stumble around the tense because they don't know whether to say is or was. Marrow hadn't stumbled. For one brief second, he'd spoken about my mother as though he already knew exactly where she was. I lay awake long after he'd fallen asleep beside me, staring at the ceiling, certain now of something far worse than infidelity, certain that whatever my sister and my husband had built together, it hadn't started with an affair at all. I called Detective Pruitt on a Tuesday morning, notebook in hand, ready to lay out everything I'd gathered. He answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Cuthbert," he said. "Funny timing. I was about to call you myself." "Why's that?" "Because of a woman named Delphine Roach," he said. "She reached out to my office yesterday. Says she's handled your family's estate work for years, alongside your sister. Said something during a routine trust review didn't sit right with her. And she wanted to know if your mother's case was still open." "Is it? Officially?" "It never closed," he said. "I made sure of that back when the search was still running. Most cases like this, once the diving stops, the file goes quiet on paper even if nobody says so out loud. I never let mine go quiet. Something about it never sat right with me." He asked me to come in and to bring whatever I had. I brought the notebook. Delphine Roach turned out to be a small, precise woman in her 50s, reading glasses pushed up into gray-streaked hair, a leather folder of her own sitting on the table between us like a mirror of mine. "I've handled the Cuthbert Trust for 11 years, she said, once we'd all settled into Pruitt's cramped little office. "Verley's always managed the day-to-day, and I've always trusted her judgment. But the trust paperwork tied to the Calhoun Street property triggered a review on my end, a routine one. The numbers didn't reconcile." "What do you mean?" Delphine opened her folder. "Several transactions connected to your mother's finances raise questions I can't comfortably explain through normal estate management. Nothing conclusive yet. Just enough inconsistencies that I felt obligated to look closer." I set my notebook on the table and opened it to the page with my own dates written in careful rows. Pruitt leaned forward first. Delphine followed. I showed them the transfer, the Houston charges, the timeline. Then I told them about the apartment, about Marrow, about following him across state lines and watching him walk through a door my sister opened. Finally, I told them about the conversation in my kitchen, about the word comfortable, about the way Marrow corrected himself after speaking about my mother as though she were someone still being looked after. The room went quiet. Not grief this time. Recognition. 3 people looking at the same set of facts from different directions and realizing none of them liked where those facts pointed. Pruitt folded his hands. "I don't know what happened to your mother," he said carefully, "but I know enough not to dismiss possibilities I would have dismissed a month ago." "You think she could be alive?" "I think we need to find out where the money went," he said. "I think we need to understand why Houston keeps showing up. And I think we need answers before anyone involved realizes we're asking questions." Delphine nodded. "I can keep reviewing the financial side quietly," she said. "If there are additional irregularities, I'll find them. Verley can't know I'm looking any harder than usual." "And I'll start working the location," Pruitt said, discreetly. "If there's nothing there, we lose nothing. If there is something there, I don't want anyone getting spooked before we understand what we're dealing with." That felt more honest, less dramatic, and somehow far more frightening, because neither of them was talking about theories anymore. They were talking about evidence. I looked between them, a detective who'd never closed his file, an attorney who'd trusted my sister for 11 years until the numbers told her not to, and myself, holding the one thing neither of them had. Not certainty, not proof, just a growing suspicion that the story I'd been told about my mother's disappearance wasn't the truth. "Then we look together," I said, quietly. "Starting now." It took Delphine almost 3 weeks to finish tracing the money. "There's a property in Texas," she told me over the phone, her voice low even though she was alone in her own office. "Leased under a shell name, paid for through an LLC registered to an address that traces back to your sister's former assistant. It's not in Verley's name directly, but the financial trail keeps circling back to people connected to her." Pruitt spent the next week working through Texas investigators. There was no dramatic breakthrough, no lucky phone call, just patient police work. A local detective conducted several drive-bys over the course of days. The reports kept coming back the same. Small ranch house, curtains always closed, groceries delivered, very little activity. One older woman occasionally seen near a window, never outside, never speaking to neighbors. "Could be nothing," Pruitt said. But neither of us believed that anymore. The warrant took time. Statements had to be reviewed. Financial records had to be verified. By the time approval finally came through, nearly a month had passed since Delphine first called Pruitt. I flew to Texas anyway. Pruitt told me twice to stay in the car. I ignored him both times. I stood at the edge of the driveway as officers approached the house. They knocked, announced themselves, waited. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened. The woman standing there looked older than I remembered, thinner, smaller somehow. Her hair carried more gray than it had the last time I'd seen her. For one terrible second, I didn't recognize her. Then I did. "Mama." Her hand tightened around the door frame. My name left her mouth before I could move. Rowena. Everything inside me stopped. Mama. She stared at me the way people stare at something they've convinced themselves they'll never see again. You weren't supposed to find me. She looked from me to the officers and back again. Then she started crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like someone who'd spent months holding herself together. Verley said if I came back, people would come after you, she said. She said investigators were looking at the family, said there were financial problems, fraud, lawsuits, something involving Marrow. Her voice shook. She told me if I contacted anyone before everything was resolved, it would destroy your council seat. She said your career would be over. I listened without interrupting. She took my phone the first week, Mama said. At first she said it was temporary. Then, every time I asked for it back, there was another reason, another delay, another explanation. The words came faster now. She handled all the groceries, all the bills, everything. She kept telling me things would be fixed soon. Why didn't you leave? I asked softly. The question hurt to ask. Mama looked away. At first I wanted to, she admitted. Then weeks passed. I didn't know anybody there. I didn't have a phone. I didn't know the address. Every time I pushed back, Verley had another document, another story, another reason I needed to wait. She swallowed hard. I started wondering if maybe she was right. The honesty of that hurt more than anything else. She kept saying she was protecting you. I finally understood. This hadn't been a locked door. It had been something quieter. A lie repeated often enough that it became a cage. None of that was true, I said. Mama's eyes found mine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then something changed in her face. Not relief, recognition. 20 years of trust collapsing under the weight of a single truth. She stood there in that doorway, finally seen, finally found, looking less like a woman being rescued, and more like a woman waking up from a very long sleep. And for the first time since the river took her, I knew we were finally looking at the same reality. She didn't fall into my arms the way I'd imagined 1,000 times since that boat capsized. Mama stood in that doorway, one hand still braced against the frame, and instead of crying, she studied me. My face, my clothes, the detective standing beside me. The way she used to study a stranger before deciding whether to trust them with anything at all. You came, she finally said. I didn't think anyone would. I never stopped looking, I told her. Not for one day. She nodded slowly, like she was testing the weight of that against something she'd carried alone for months. Verley told me terrible things would happen if I came back. That Marrow had done something with my name. Fraud, she called it. Moved money, signed papers that weren't his to sign. She said if I surfaced, it would destroy your seat on the council, take the house, ruin everything your father and I built. None of that was true, I said. There was never any fraud charge waiting for anyone but her. I watched something shift across my mother's face when I said it. Not relief, not yet. Something slower. Recognition. The kind that settles in when the truth finally catches up to a lie you've been living inside for too long. Her shoulders, which had been curled inward since she opened the door, loosened slightly. Not completely. Just enough. 20 years, she said, mostly to herself. 20 years, I let her handle everything because it was easier than asking questions I should have asked from the start. You couldn't have known. No. The answer came quietly. Then she looked down at her hands. For the first time since I'd arrived, she suddenly looked every bit her age, every bit as tired as the past months should have made her. I kept telling myself she wouldn't lie to me, she said. Every time something didn't make sense, I found another excuse for her. That's the part I'm having trouble with. I stepped closer. Mama! I trusted her. Her voice cracked on the last word, not dramatically. Just enough. enough to remind me she wasn't coming back from a vacation. She was coming back from a betrayal. For several seconds, nobody said anything. The Texas wind moved through the trees. An officer shifted his weight near the driveway. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked. Then Mama took a slow breath. Another one. And when she looked up again, something had changed. Not because she was suddenly healed, not because the hurt was gone, because she'd finally stopped carrying it alone. She looked past me toward Detective Pruitt and the officers waiting near the cars. I watched my mother, thinner than I'd ever seen her, dressed in clothes that weren't hers, still trying to find solid ground beneath her feet, straighten her back by degrees. Not all at once, slowly, deliberately. The way someone stands after spending too long bent under a weight they never should have been carrying. "I'm not going to stand here being grateful for my own rescue," she said. There was strength in her voice now, not anger, not yet, just certainty. Not after what that woman took from me, from all of us. "Mama, don't cry for me yet," she said. "We've got work to do." I heard it then. The woman I'd grown up with, the woman who taught me how to survive hard things without letting them define me. "I intend to be standing right beside you when we do it." I'd spent months imagining what I'd feel the moment I found her. Relief, mostly, an ending to the not knowing that had hollowed me out since that river took her. What I felt instead, standing in that driveway beneath the Texas sun, was something closer to recognition. My mother hadn't come back untouched. She hadn't come back unbroken. But she had come back. And sometimes that kind of strength matters more. She wasn't the woman Verley left in that house. She was the woman finally walking out of it. We brought Verley and Marrow together the same way Pruitt had planned it. A family meeting at Mama's house, the one on Calhoun Street, the one Verley had nearly signed away while everyone believed our mother was dead. Nobody told them what was waiting inside. 3 weeks had passed since Texas. 3 weeks of formal statements, financial reviews, subpoenas, interviews, and more paperwork than I knew existed in the world. Mama had spent hours with investigators. Delphine had spent even longer tracing money trails that stretched back years. What began as questions had slowly turned into evidence, and evidence had finally become something prosecutors were willing to act on. What happened in that house wasn't a trap. It was simply the first moment nobody could hide from the truth anymore. Verley walked in first, dressed like she always dressed for difficult conversations, composed, soft-spoken, ready to manage whatever needed managing. She got 2 steps past the doorway before she saw Mama sitting at the kitchen table, very much alive, very much done being managed. Her face went the color of paper. "Mama," she started. "Sit down, Verley," Mama said, and there was nothing in her voice for her daughter to lean on. Marrow came in behind her, saw Mama, saw me standing beside the table with my arms crossed and stopped moving entirely, like his body understood before his mind caught up. "I think you both know why we're here," I said. Detective Pruitt stepped out from the hallway then, Delphine just behind him with a folder thick enough that even Verley's composure cracked at the sight of it. "Verley Cuthbert," Pruitt said. "Over the last several weeks we've collected financial records, witness statements, property records, and testimony connected to your mother's disappearance and isolation. Those findings have been reviewed by the district attorney's office." "I was protecting this family," Verley said, voice rising for the first time I could remember in years. "Everything I did to hold us together." "You held us together with a lie," Mama said, "and you used me to tell it." Verley's eyes found mine, searching for the sister who used to hand her every burden without question. I didn't give her that face anymore. "And you," I said to Marrow, 8 months with my sister, helping keep my mother hidden, telling me comfortable like she was still someone you both checked on. You don't get to call any of that confusion, You knew exactly what you were protecting, and it wasn't me. Rowena, I never meant— It's over, I said. Flat, final. No room left in my voice for anything else. Whatever this was, whatever you thought it could survive being, it's over. I'm done being the last person to know what's happening in my own house. He didn't argue. Some part of him, I think, had been waiting for this exact sentence since the day I followed him to Houston. Pruitt nodded toward the officers waiting outside. The district attorney authorized charges yesterday, he said quietly. 2 officers stepped in, calm, procedural. The way people move when the hard work has already been done and all that's left is carrying it out. Verlie reached for Mama's hand once before they let her out, and Mama pulled hers back without a single word. The clearest sentence she could have given her. I thought, watching them both walk out through the same front door I'd grown up running through as a girl, of every small thing that had brought us to this room. A driver who'd noticed grass that wasn't on a man's shoes, who'd booked a flight without asking why twice, who'd waited outside a brick apartment building with the patience of someone who already understood what was at stake. None of this happens without Calvert, I said quietly, mostly to Mama, mostly to myself. She nodded, like she already knew. Outside, through the window, I watched the patrol cars pull away with my sister and my husband inside them. No ambiguity left in either of their faces. No story left smooth enough to survive what we'd finally laid out in the light. 3 months later, Delphine spread the new trust documents across Mama's kitchen table. The same table where Verlie had once spread her legal pad, planning a funeral for a woman who hadn't died. Joint control, Delphine said, sliding the papers toward us. Both your names on everything now. Nothing moves without both signatures. Mama signed first, her handwriting steadier than I'd seen it in years. I signed beneath her, and for the first time since that Saturday phone call in council chambers, something in my chest unclenched all the way. The criminal cases were still working their way through the courts, but the broad outlines had become clear. Verlie accepted a plea agreement, fraud, elder abuse, obstruction. Several additional charges were dismissed as part of the agreement in exchange for full cooperation and financial restitution. Her sentence came to 7 years. Marrow reached a separate agreement months later. The prosecutors never accused him of creating the scheme, but they proved he knew far more than he admitted and continued helping maintain it after he understood what was happening. His sentence was 5 years. Neither outcome felt especially satisfying, but justice rarely arrives looking exactly the way grief imagines it. The divorce finalized quietly, almost anticlimactic after everything else. I kept the house. He kept whatever was left of a life built on a lie I'd finally stopped believing. The council seat survived it all, somehow stronger for it. People respect a woman who finds out the truth and acts on it instead of burying it the way everyone expected her to. I won my next election by the widest margin of my career, and I didn't campaign on any of this. I didn't need to. People already knew. Mama moved back into the Calhoun Street house the week the locks changed, and some Saturdays now I drive out there myself. No council session waiting, no schedule pulling me anywhere else. Calvert still drives me most days, though I've told him more than once he could retire if he wanted to. He just shakes his head and says he's not done yet, like there's still something worth watching for. Last Saturday, Mama asked me to come down to the river with her. Not the Wilmington exactly. A quieter stretch a few miles up. Somewhere she'd started fishing again now that she'd reclaimed her Saturdays the same way she'd reclaimed everything else. You don't have to come, she said, baiting her line without looking at me. I want to, I said. We sat there most of the afternoon, not saying much, the water moving slow and unbothered beneath a boat that wasn't going anywhere near deep water this time. She caught nothing. I didn't either. It didn't matter. Somewhere downstream, past the bend where the current picks up, That same water still carried whatever it had carried the day everything started. The silt, the secrets, the version of my family that drowned right alongside the story Verley tried to bury with it. I watched my mother's line drift lazy in the current, her face calm in a way I hadn't seen since before any of this began, and understood, finally, that some things the river takes, it doesn't get to keep forever. Some of us find our way back to the surface,